Welcome to our weekly webinar. So it's great to have here on our panel today, Lisa Ransom. We also have Neil Cowie all the way from Japan. So our regular panel, which is great. And we have our fantastic guest presenter today, all the way from the Gold Coast of Australia, Dr. James Burt, and he's from Bond University, and I think a relatively freshly minted associate professor. So known James for a while. He's done a lot of work in mobile learning and particularly in immersive reality and AR, VR with mobile devices and in various different contexts. So looking forward to James sharing some of his experiences today, some of his highlights, some of his ideas. You know, where's it going? What can it do? Why would we engage with this in education? And we'll ask him some questions along the way. So thank you, James.
Thank you, Tom. So my other presenter's not quite here yet, so my slides may not represent exactly what everything's going on, but that's all right. We deal with these things. So let me just share the screen. This one should be the correct one.
Yes, that looks good.
Are you all good? Does that look all right for you? Do you see that?
How to begin?
How to begin? That's probably not where I want to begin. There we go. Well, there you go. How to begin.
Looks like we're at the first page now.
No, that's all right. Doesn't matter. So this is a joint presentation, but I can present it on behalf of Michael and myself. So we were asked today to talk a little bit about XR and enhanced simulation in higher education. And I thought I would begin the presentation with a little bit of an intro and then also what the heck is XR? Because a lot of people ask that question. So here's Michael and I. So Michael is a ghost today, but that's okay. Oh no, here he is.
He's just joined us.
So he is
liking the beard, Michael.
Arrived in time. So here's a picture of Michael and I presenting and our thoughts down at Apple. And in this case, it was around mobile devices and some of the features that Apple were introducing into mobile devices. And part of that conversation was about how mobile devices, in particular augmented reality, could play out in the future. And it was interesting that oftentimes when companies introduce, new technology like augmented reality or virtual reality, that it sometimes is introduced from the perspective of sales and marketing, and maybe not necessarily from the side of pedagogical practice and how that technology is going to be used. So I thought I would include that little statement because it leads into some of my other discussions today about technology being a bit of a gimmick sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point to make. Thanks, James.
So I'd start that off by saying that we often hear that, especially usually from our superiors, I have a great idea, let's integrate some tech into the classroom. Typically it's because they've bought something and they want you to use it.
Or being sold something, you mean?
Or being sold something, that's exactly right. And I think the difficulty that we have is that technology changes so rapidly. And I think that we can see that in particular from this slide here, which is the Gartner hype cycle, that there is so much technology, there is so much innovation, and this only shows a snippet. And this is essentially what is upcoming as opposed to what's even out there today. And we go through these troughs of innovation, expectation, disillusionment, which is sort of where we sit today with a bit of the XR side of things, and I'd like to talk a bit about that as well. Then hopefully it gets into enlightenment, and then we become productive with it. Now, we can see here that we have our mixed reality, our augmented reality, which is part of the XR family, sort of coming down to the bottom or trough of the disillusionment. And I think if anyone has been trying to adopt augmented reality or virtual reality in the classroom setting, that there often is a sense of disillusionment, but also a sense of excitement and expectation of it being, a really productive technology. And it's really our roles as educators to integrate, but also to understand and really create the learning and the pedagogy around these things as to essentially to lead it to productivity. But we shouldn't also forget that we shouldn't lead with technology, which is often what ends up happening, unfortunately. So if we lead with technology, we often get what I call gamification, where the technology is a gimmick. And here is an example of gamification that we used to essentially highlight robotics taking over people's jobs. In this case, it was a robot taking over a news anchor's job on live national news. And it went down really well. It was a bit of fun for a student event, but it made me start to think, and I think Michael can attest to this as well, that oftentimes we do this for a bit of a marketing ploy, for a bit of a laugh, but actually this really does represent what we often see in education, which is this idea of let's stick it in there, let's see how it works, and if it doesn't work, then we better make it work because we spent a lot of money on it. I like this robot, costing $15,000. So we started to think about this, Michael and I, and we formed the Mixed Reality Research Lab probably about 5 years ago, Michael. Was it about that sort of time frame?
Yeah, maybe 6
years ago. Yeah. And it was around the same time as showing off that robot, by the way. And we started to think about this idea that there is a lot of emerging technology. There's a lot of educators looking at applying technology, often from the perspective of being led by technology first. And we started to think, what does that mean? So I promised that I would try to demystify the idea of what the heck is XR. So we often talk about mixed reality. And if you look back in the history of research, Milgram and Cassano really cemented this idea of the mixed reality continuum, that we have the physical reality on one side and we have the virtual reality on the other. And that mixed reality is the bit that sits in the middle. Then some people came along and said, well, that's a bit of a difficulty. We need a big umbrella term for this whole area. So let's call it XR, where X could be, some people say, extended. Other people say it's the variable X that replaces physical reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. I always like to sort of use that analogy, that it's the variable X and that the R stands for reality. But essentially, it's the idea that we have a blending of virtual and physical realities that is essentially enabled through technology. This could be headset-based technology, this could be sensor-based technology, but also underpinning this whole thing, and Michael would attest to this, is that we need solid understanding, pedagogy, and essentially a belief that this is not just a technology-led approach, that we genuinely need to think about the research and the pedagogy underpinning it. So
well, one of the things, James, that is actually why it's kind of current is the the power of mobile devices now, because XR, AR have been around for a long time, but it's now that everyone's got a powerful computer in their pocket as a smartphone that suddenly it's actually achievable, isn't it?
It is, and I think I guess that's what we sort of wanted to highlight with this particular slide here, which is that we started with the idea that XR was all about, Vives and Oculus Rift and expensive computers and cave systems and big simulation environments. And then we started to think that exactly what Tom just said there, that if this is to become something that people use, that is accessible, then we need to think about what is it that people currently do use. And all you need to do is look at your pocket, as Tom has indicated, that the mobile phone itself is one of the major disruptors to this particular endeavor. And that was really what we started to focus on, was the mobile device being the disruptor and the mobile device being the conduit to enabling XR visualization. And I think if you look at companies like Apple, like Google, they also believe this as well, because they're creating toolkits that enable mobile devices, your BYOD device sitting in your pocket, to essentially augment, virtualize all of these different environments. And that the power of these devices is increasing so dramatically that it is enabling these things. To the point that hopefully in 2020, Apple will be releasing their mixed reality headset device that will enable a blending of augmented and virtual reality. So these are just a few of the examples that we have here in relation to XR and the work that we do. And it's not just within higher education. We also apply this work out into the field. So we've worked with industry partners on grant-funded projects, as well as obviously students both at my university, Bond University, and also at Central Queensland University with Michael. So I promised a couple of little examples. I want to leave some time for Michael because I am mindful of time and questions. But I guess one of the big ones that we looked at was where can we apply these things? Now, health sciences is an obvious choice. Tom would attest to this because a number of his projects are in the health sciences. Dr. Christian Morrow at Bond University is a real advocate for mixed reality in higher education and was awarded the highest award for teaching in Australia in relation to his work in XR visualization into learning of anatomy and physiology. And it was wonderful to see that the work that we had done in the Mixed Reality Research Lab really led to those innovations in relation to particularly mobile-driven technology. And Michael was just in Japan actually presenting the example at the bottom there, which was the heart MR example at the Serious Games in Health conference, which he can probably talk a little bit about today. But the idea being that we're blending the area of mixed reality and visualization, but also learning analytics. And this particular project blends those two things. We've used it in areas like computer science and networking as a visual aid. In this case, teaching networking to students. You can see that a number of these get highlighted on the news, and I guess that comes down to that popularity of the I guess the novelty of these things, but also the excitement that people have around this technology. So yes, I hate to say that the gimmick sells in that sense, but I believe that it is exciting for young people. It is exciting for the public to see these technologies in action and to understand that the way that we learn, especially through mobile technology, is changing things, especially in the education sector. This particular example that we did, we actually published this with a special issue last year, and a plug for that we're doing the upgrade of that this year, Tom.
Yep. Well done.
Yep.
Well done.
And so we published a study last year. This is just one part of it, really exploring the idea that can a mobile device in a classroom doing XR visualization, is it comparable with high-end devices like the HTC Vive or the HoloLens? And in that work, we found that indeed it is, which is, we were hoping for that, but it was great to see that that was indeed the case. I'm sorry I don't have the the little example on this slide with the mobile version of that, but essentially that's what that publication is. And the future of that work that hopefully I'll be publishing this year, given the kind reviews, is a multi-user version of this. So rather than being a single user experience, it is taking it from a isolationary based learning experience to a co-learning experience with multiple users, so that you're utilizing the underpinning networking like we see in multiplayer games, and essentially enabling learners to get together within these environments and undertake learning. And so that's essentially the
that would be quite, I mean, the images you've got there are kind of interesting, where you've got one person standing in the middle, and then you've kind of got this audience. So it'll be interesting to see what your multi-user environment looks like in contrast, where it seems to be more of this current one, like, you know.
Look, if I do have time at the end, I'll dig up a photo as a bit of a teaser to the paper.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
To show you. I guess as a bit there, just as a little teaser, it is interesting to see learners in multi-user environments, because their experience with virtual reality is isolationist, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I guess some of the findings, if I can not give away too much from the paper, is that they do struggle in essentially communicating within multi-user virtual environments, because their affordances have been connected to isolational single-user virtual spaces. And I think that the future of my own work and of Michael's work related to multi-user experiences will be in the a much more pedagogical integration of how do we get these students to communicate better within a multi-user virtual space. Because
so just one oh, so I'm butting in there, but so one of the things we found, James, in doing VR experience simulation scenario with students, was it was really powerful for us as lecturers to see what the students were experiencing, and so being able to mirror what they were seeing onto a screen. So we didn't have to keep asking them, where are you? What are you at? You know, are you lost? You know, we could actually see where they are in the virtual environment. That made a huge difference.
Yeah, well, spectation, which is what you see here, is an important side. And I guess that's the differentiation. So how do we start to, what terminology do we use when we say a multi-user learning environment? Yeah. Is it a user like you see here inside the experience and you're spectating it from the outside, which is what is happening here? Or is it where all users are inside that virtual environment and they're participating in the learning activity? And that's, I see there's two separate sides of things. One is looking at multi-user spectation, and the other one is looking at multi-user interactivity. And
I guess you've always got to come back to why.
That's exactly right.
You know, why are you doing that, and why not just do that in real life? So, yeah.
Exactly. And usually it's the case of that the thing that you're investigating or interacting with doesn't exist, or is in the planning to exist, and you're trying to communicate that plan, that concept to individuals. And that's
or it's incredibly risky. You know, you don't want to kill students. Yep. But if they can experience something.
Training is exactly right. You're right.
Yeah.
Get them out onto a job site, or get them out into a dangerous environment where you want to simulate different effects on the individual. So look, there's some of the things. And just a little plug for my PhD student that is hopefully writing a paper for our special issue as well, that he was exploring the idea of a sense of place, and that physical locations have a sense of place, and that a place itself is a service. In this case, the institution is a service. And does augmented reality, and in this case, the combination with gamification, enhance that service? In this case, enhancing the students' experience. These students participated in a lecture or a lecture series that we ran, looking at the built environment and building information modelling, which is hopefully something that will get up at ASCILITE this year. And the idea with this project is that these are Chinese international postgraduate students. We have an influx of them, about 150 in the class. And we wanted to essentially get them to experience the place, i.e. Bond University in this particular case. And it was really interesting to see the delight on their faces when we were able to blend technology, and in this case, we have the world's largest privately held Indigenous artwork collection in the world, and to get them to experience the place through both high-end technology, but also the most ancient culture in the world, which is the Indigenous Aboriginal culture. And the project is very fascinating. As a bit of a teaser to the thesis results, it is interesting that when you interview the students about their experience with doing the tour, both with a real tour guide, i.e. an Indigenous artist, and using the mobile application, that in almost all circumstances, and I'm saying about 90%, or even more, 95%, they would prefer to do the tour with a mobile device than they would with a real-life Indigenous artist going through and talking about their work. What's fascinating when you then talk to older generations, even myself, when I've done it, I would prefer to go through the experience with the Indigenous artist. I've done both experiences, and sitting there and listening to the story, I get tingles when I listen to the story with the Indigenous artist. When I do it with the mobile device, I don't get that. Yet the students have the opposite. And so I think that's quite interesting to see that. And I think as we look at the audience today, we would all probably be sitting in the category of wanting to do the experience with the Indigenous artist, perhaps. And so I find that quite interesting. What's this doing? Oh, I don't know, something's decided to break. There we go. So how do we begin? So I'm going to be the slide handler for Michael now, because he can talk a little bit about the how to begin process. Again, I'm mindful of time. We're really running out. So Mike, I'm sorry. You'll have to.
We've got 7 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Thanks, James. I'm just dissing you in the chat anyway, so that's fine. You just called yourself the older generation. You actually admitted to that. I thought was interesting. Before I want to talk about pedagogy before technology, which I will do in 2 minutes, Tom. Before I do that, I wanted to touch base on what Tom said earlier about mobile being a really important part of this. So I just came back from Japan, and that's why I look really jet lagged, even though Japan's actually only an hour different from us, but 18 hours on a plane. And as part of that, I demonstrated the heart model that James showed you a few slides ago. And one of the benefits of that, as with a few of the things that James and I have done, is that it is mobile. So I walked into the room, and all of these other people were demonstrating these things that they'd done with HTC Vive, with these customized controllers, with all these other bits and pieces of hardware and complicated software. And I walked in and said, I want to show you this tool that James and I have developed. Here, let me show it to you. And I passed around a headset with a mobile phone in it, and the cube that I brought with me, and they were able to try it in the room. And they were able to do that because it is a cheap mobile device. And I must admit, when James and I present these things, people look at them and they often go, well, that's great, but it's a $20,000, $30,000 intervention for that expensive thing, this other thing. And we say, well, ours, and I got this question in the audience, James, as they said, how much would it cost to give this to somebody? I said, well, the headset costs $10, and then you've just got to print the cube and they use their own phone. So maybe $15 for a set for somebody to use. And the audience was literally awestruck. So I think that the mobile BYO device stuff can't be undersold. I think that's really important. And Tom, I know Tom is a big advocate for that. So what I wanted to talk to you about really briefly, and I know I've only got a couple of minutes, is this model that James has got up on the screen. And this is the old version of the model. The questions are the same, but it doesn't look quite as sexy. But it gives you the idea, which is this process that we will follow to actually try and implement these things. And it really is about what Tom has already been advocating for, what James has already been advocating for, which is this idea that we should always start with the problem. We should always identify the pedagogical problem in our classroom, and then based on that pedagogical problem, come up with a solution that makes sense. And so for paramedics, which we did a few years ago, we started with the problem. We identified that the students had an issue with learning paramedic skills before they came to res school, and we wanted to solve that problem. And on the slide there, James has got some quotes from the students, and it's almost like the students had anticipated that we would approach the paramedics and ask them. The last one's my favorite: any software or equipment that can at least help us go through the motions of doing the skills. So they knew there was a problem there. They knew they wanted to practice these skills as distance students before they came to the res school. And so James runs a lab called the Mixed Reality Research Lab, and we decided to build a mixed reality intervention to solve that problem. And again, it is mobile based. It is a mobile phone in a headset. You can see Emma wearing the first version there on the left, with a set of 3D printed tools that we sent to the students. And so we sent them the headsets, we sent them the tools. It cost us probably $5 to send each set to each individual student. And they were
the most expensive part was the mailing, was the post.
Yes, it cost us more to mail it than it did to print it. And then the best thing is they came to the res school at the end of term, so a lot of them actually brought the tools back. So we got some of the tools back as well. But this was a solution to that problem. We started with the problem. And as I always say when I present this, if the solution had been something other than mixed reality, then James and I would have pursued that solution. But in this case, the solution was mixed reality, and it made sense. And that's happened to James and I just recently. We met with a speech pathologist who wanted to do mixed reality. After talking to her, we worked out that mixed reality didn't actually make any sense in that context. And so I'm not going to dwell on that too much longer, but if you want to touch base with me about the pedagogy before technology model, it usually resonates really well with teachers, this idea that you start identifying the problem in your classroom, and then based on identifying that problem, you work out what technology might suit the best. And so I can see the timer counting down on the right-hand side, so I'm going to stop talking.
3 minutes.
Give anyone a chance. I noticed Lisa said that she has a question. We can't hear you, Lisa.
Got it now. Sorry, just had to find my audio. I just had a question as I was going along. Is there a level of reaction from students? Now, what I mean by that is, do you have older students compared to younger students, and what kind of reaction did they have to this mode of learning?
Look, I do workshops with K-12 teachers, and I do workshops with kids as well. So I've put preppies, 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds in this. So I guess we've had sort of the breadth of it. And my experience has been that they all consider it a bit of a gimmick at first. And there's definitely an issue with the novelty effect there, that they think it's exciting at first. But especially with the teachers, if you can get past the gimmick and you can say, here's what you could use it for. Have you thought about using this to teach history or teach geology or teach math? Then they can really see value in it. I think you've just got to get past that gimmicky stuff. But yeah, James can talk to you a bit about the experience of actually wearing the headset.
So I was just going to say, so Michael predominantly works with the K-12 and the young ones. I predominantly work with the higher education and also industry. And so from an industry perspective, where we've seen really good integration is in construction. So architecture, engineering, construction, so the AEC industries. And they're actually leaders in the integration of mixed reality based communication channels, especially because they are moving towards a policy from government down of building information modeling, which is essentially you've got a digital twin of your building site, including all of the data around that. And one of your activities is that your building information model must remain the same as your built environment as it is progressing through the process. Essentially, imagine it's the new way of doing architectural plans, designs, and that sort of thing.
Okay,
but the idea being that can be put through simulation environments, and one of them being virtual or augmented based reality.
Okay,
Well,
great.
I'm going to have to say thank you now before the timer runs out, James and Michael, but thank you very much for that. And we can probably keep talking, but with our plan, it's going to shut us off in less than a minute, it says. But it's been great to chat with you guys, and I'm sure there's a lot of other questions that Neil might have, etc. But we'll see how we go with the rest of the time, whether we get kicked off or not.
Yeah, we're waiting for that less than a minute to
Expire.
Oh.